Nestled between the first and third floors of the Texas Annual Conference Center near downtown Houston. And welcome to episode 2 of This Is How We Thrive podcast. We have a special guest. I'm Irv White, the host, by the way, but our special guest is a lady with many titles. You're the co-facilitator of the Parish Project. This is the title I'm giving you today, and that is that you are the chief execution officer, if you will, of the Thrive Project. And you are an executive pastor, the executive pastor at St. Paul's in Houston. It's Brandi Horton. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so listen, I have a couple of questions that inquiring minds want to know, and maybe it's me. What does an executive pastor do?
What I do, I think an executive pastor can be a catch-all title. What I do is I work with our staff. I help us make sure that we have the right staff and that they're in the right spots. I help with evaluation and processes, and I do our facilities. I work with our facilities.
And listen, your husband, David, is pastor at Faith in Spring. I want to know, again, these are questions that I just want to know the answers to. First of all, how did you guys meet?
We met at seminary. We met at Duke.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So were you both ordained together?
We were ordained together. That's a story for another day. I don't know if you were there, but at our ordination service, we were not ordained with our class because David passed out. And so we were ordained by Bishop Huey in a prayer room off to the side.
Well, that's just the way it was.
It's just the way it was.
And the next question, and we'll listen, we're here to talk about Thrive, but these are nosy questions on my part. So who's the better preacher?
Oh, that's unfair. Oh, that's unfair. Because, you should I believe you should always be in awe that the person that you're married to chose you. And so I always think he is better than, that he is my better half. And he would probably, I say the same thing about me.
Yeah. And it's always been interesting to me when you have ministry couples, because that's a unique dynamic.
It is.
And so how have you been able to navigate that? You have children, and he's over here, you're over there.
We do a lot of calendars, but I think the best thing about it is that somebody asked me why or how do you do that, and I don't know any different.
Okay.
We met in seminary. We met before we were in the parish, and this is all I know. And for me, it's a gift. He understands my job. I will say that we talk about church a lot, but it's a gift to be able to have somebody that is your partner, that is a partner in ministry in a different way than we typically think about pastor spouses as partners.
And look, we have worked together on a few things, and I can testify that good things can come out of Hallsville, Texas.
Yes, good things come out of Hallsville, Texas.
Right.
It's a good place.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a good place.
So we're going to talk about Thrive, and I know you are uniquely involved with that project. What is Thrive?
Well, Thrive has been a grassroots initiative of the annual conference. It began, I don't think we ever intended for it to become what it has become. It began really, Bishop Harvey, I think last time, dated it from this Lilly Endowment proposal, but it grew from there. And none of us could have seen that it would become the strategic focus for the annual conference, that these markers would be infiltrating churches in the way that they have, and it has been a gift to watch.
So what did you think it was going to be?
I mean,
what was the expectation?
We really thought that it was going to just be the proposal that we put forward for Lilly, but the proposal took on a life of its own, in part because it was the right proposal for the right moment, that the church needed some different way of imagining what it meant to be vibrant and vital in today's world. And as soon as that hit, that's where Thrive grew out of that.
So, and we'll talk about the markers, but you have clarity, you have witness, you have abundance, you have kinship, and then you have joy. And I guess we'll probably talk about each of those at some point. But what do you think is lacking, or how can church thrive? When you think about thriving, I think about when, a new member steps up and says, I'm going to dedicate myself to United Methodist Church, my prayer, my presence, my gifts, my service. How do you connect those markers to that?
Oh, sure. Kelsey Johnson has done some really good work around overlapping the Thrive markers with the membership vows, because we are already committing for our witness. We are already, and so she is the one to talk about that, not me. But at the same time, it does connect. And the other piece I'll say about that is that as much as we want congregations to thrive, we also want communities to thrive. But I think that starts with an individual thriving. That it's all of those layers. And so when a person commits to the United Methodist Church, it is their life that is changed. It is the individual life that infiltrates the community life.
Yeah, I want you to talk about that more, because I think, people should not get the idea that thrive is some ointment that you lather on, the walls of the church, and somehow now you're thriving. Right. It really begins with the individual.
Well, and I think it begins with living into it. The thing I'm sitting with this week, it's not always the thing I'm sitting with, but Howard Thurman has a quote where he says, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do it." Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And I think what Thurman is arguing is that when we come alive, others come alive too. Because the people that we are more free to be ourselves. We are more free to allow the Spirit to move through us and to work through us. And so it's this kind of, the way that I preached about it was this cascade of life. And so I think that but you don't just come alive one time, that you've got to keep re-engaging the things that make you come alive. And I think if we're thinking about thrive, individuals have to continue to be clear about who they are. They have to know how to tell a Jesus story. They have to see abundance over scarcity. They have to be able to be in conversation with people who are different than them, and they have to embody joy. And then that trickles up and it trickles out into the community and those that they meet.
What do you think the challenge is with churches being clear about what they've been called to do?
Oh, I think that the challenge is, I think there are multiple challenges, right? That sometimes it is that we don't know how to discern. That's one piece. I also think, and this kind of goes back to the beginning of the Thrive Initiative, that we have a problem with traditional metrics of church. That attendance, buildings, and cash have been the things that we have said tell us whether we are healthy, whether we are vital, and I think that attendance, buildings, and cash limit the possibilities. They keep your imagination kind of in a box, whereas clarity is inviting you to be who you were created to be as a church. And if we're after attendance, buildings, and cash, what we're going to do is we're going to create the church that the church down the road is, so that we can compete. And what Thrive is inviting us into is collaboration and connection over competition. It's inviting us into uniquely be in our place and be who we are as the people of God in that particular spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always thought and believed that comparison breeds discontent. And it's very easy to look at the church down the street and see what they're doing and sell yourself short, because in your mind, you can't do the type of ministry or the quality of ministry that they're doing, but there's ministry you can do, and just be happy about what the Lord is blessing you with right there where you are.
Well, and it's not just that. It's not just that you can't do it the way that they are doing it, but you're not supposed to.
Right.
That we don't need 1,000 churches doing the exact same things. We need your church to do what your church is supposed to do, and we need you as the clergy person to do what you are uniquely called and gifted.
So how do churches get started understanding that and fleshing that out?
I think that one of the things that churches can do to begin understanding where they are is to pay attention to their location. I know that we have regional churches. I know that we have geographic churches. And I know that sometimes people drive in to go to a church. But just because your neighborhood has changed doesn't mean that you're not in the place that you're in, because God put you there, and that you need to pay attention to who your neighbors are. That's a little bit about clarity, and it's a little bit about kinship.
Right.
And it's a little bit about abundance too. Because you're in a spot for a reason, and that's, I think, so I think you kind of work the process in a little bit that you start with who are my neighbors and why am I here, but you also pay attention to the resources and what do I have at my disposal to meet the needs that God is calling me to meet.
So how do you talked about the old markers, the old measures. how do you measure clarity? How do you measure abundance? How do you measure joy, worship? How do you measure those things?
That is one of the things that people, when people have thought about this isn't going to work, it's because we can't count those things. Mm-hmm. And I think that counting the numeric measures are often actually lag measures for the lead work that is happening. The impact that happens is told in stories. Mm-hmm. And I've heard Bishop Harvey say you can smell joy. Well, you walk in a place and you know that place is different. Mm-hmm. And I think that we do have a tool that we are using to measure as part of the parish project. It's called the Thriving Congregations Index, and it's a perception-based study. And it is really interesting, and it causes data nerds to nerd out. But at the same time, that's not where the transformation happens. The transformation happens in the stories. My husband's the senior pastor of Faith in Spring, and our oldest daughter is 7.5. And since he has been there, that has been her church. She has asked to transfer her membership to that church, and that has been her church. And that's the first time she's not chosen my church.
Wow.
And I struggled with it. And so I've never done this before, but I decided to just show up at Faith one Sunday morning because I kind of wanted to see what the deal was. And Caroline is at the end of the hall, and I could see her down the hall, and she starts running. And I think that she sees me, and she is running to Mom. And then one of the youth reaches down and scoops her up and twirls her around in the hallway. And Caroline is laughing, and the youth is saying, "I'm so glad I saw you today." And it was this intergenerational moment. That youth is not responsible for children. And I thought, oh, that's it.
That's joy.
It's joy.
Right.
And it's why she wants to be in that place.
Right. I was talking to a pastor just yesterday, just about how do you measure these things? And his comment was, when I first got there, everybody was quiet, nobody would laugh, and now they're laughing, they're smiling. Well, that's joy. There's been a transformation. And once you have those types of transformations, I believe the moment you get clarity doesn't mean you're going to right away have a great ministry. Once you deal with abundance and worship and kinship, but all those things will lead, I believe, to great ministry being developed in that congregation.
One of the things that we did with the TCI, which is kind of that measurement piece, is that we broke each of the 5 markers into what we call in the parish project the component elements. And so these are the things that go into this marker that help make it up. And with joy, it has 3 component elements, and they are the spirit of the place, which you can feel and smell and taste and see, and it's Christian hope, because joy is ultimately also about hope, that we don't get to joy without hope, and it's play. Does the congregation know how to play together? Do they know how to laugh? Because it's important that I think sometimes the church takes ourselves a little too seriously when really there's an invitation that we are allowed to be free in a space that is church.
So who's the most important player in that?
Oh,
I would think it'd be the pastor. But am I wrong in that?
So I yes, and can I do that?
Sure.
Okay, yes, and I think that the pastor plays a key role, as pastors always do. But really, these 5 markers, you heard the bishop talk about the Harvard Human Flourishing Project just briefly, because the Harvard Human Flourishing Project has this idea that anybody anywhere can flourish. And so we believe that any congregation anywhere can thrive. But after that kind of piece of research, the other thing that played into the development of these markers were listening sessions all over the annual conference with lay people. And that was intentional, because the proposal was about this grant, but if you're going to do that work with lay people need to be able to lead it. And the Methodist movement is primarily about the revitalization of the church, which is led by laity. And so it's a yes and. I think it's got to be both. And
we're going to talk about the Parish Project. You're going to come back and talk more about that. I think that warrants a good discussion about exactly what that is and the expectation for that. So who's thriving? What are some great examples? And listen, this has only just begun, really. Right. But obviously, there's some proofs of performance. Sure. So where are you seeing that?
It has been really fun to see how other people that, this not only started with listening sessions with laity, but it also started kind of with conversations about what are we going to apply for. But that room that we were having those conversations in kept changing. It was different people at the table all the time. And so it has been really fun to see people that weren't even in those rooms take the work and make the work their own, which is really what I think Thrive is about, is the ability to be adaptive in your particular place. And so there was a season, and still churches in the annual conference are preaching through this with sermon series. I know that Bryan Community Church did. I know Memorial Drive has also done that. There was a development of liturgy, which is available on the conference website. I didn't write any of that. It's all been written by people that have taken this and made it their own. I've heard Wildwood used it with their administrative board. One of my colleagues at St. Paul's, Trey Burns, has used it to help his staff as like a staff management tool. How do you need more clarity in your work? How can we help you tell the story of what's happening in your ministry area? Which I thought was brilliant. And then we've heard of other people, like Trinity UMC in Beaumont has done this a couple of different ways. They've preached through it several times. They've used it in their administrative board sessions. They have gone back and worked through all 5 of the markers. And what was so moving about that, I think, is that when Nathan Hodge, their senior pastor, got there, Trinity in Beaumont was hurting. They were in a place that disaffiliation had really damaged their congregation. And so Thrive has been a mechanism of healing for them. And I think because it says that even though you are half the numerical size of what you were before, the Spirit's not done with you yet. And so I really think that what will happen next for them is that because they have focused on these 5 markers as a healing mechanism, that the Spirit's going to keep moving them forward to not just healing, but to really true vitality and vibrancy.
So who came up with the name Thrive? Where did that come from?
Well, it came from a couple of different places. So the actual Lilly Endowment the request for proposals was called the Thriving Congregations Initiative. Then I think the bishop was looking, or there was groups of people looking around for how do we narrate this and call it one thing, because this is not the Parish Project and it's not just Fresh Expressions, it's all of it. It's the whole conference initiative. And so Thrive became the kind of short phrase for that. And I think
that's the goal.
It's the goal. And so, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So, you talked about some of these churches who are implementing, actually just talking to the individuals, because I think in my mind initially, I'm thinking it is more of a church thing, when really it's an individual thing. It's really about me, what I understand. Am I clear about who God has called me to be? What my role is in the congregation that I am in? How do I worship? How can I enhance my worship? Why am I worshiping? Who am I worshiping? You're right. This spirit of scarcity can run rampant.
Oh, sure.
It really can. I think sometimes you'll find congregations so caught up in bailing the water out of their boat, they forget about, as Jesus was crossing the Sea of Galilee and the storm came up, and the text says, and the other little boats. We forget about the other little boats out there, And so I think I just think this is a great initiative. What is your expectation of it as you move forward? What is next?
I think that I am reticent to have expectations.
Okay.
And the only reason is because the Spirit has already done more than I ever dreamed was possible. I think last month I presented to the conference leadership team, and we have been dating this to this Lilly Endowment grant proposal. But I actually think that's the wrong date. And I said that to them because I think that the date that this really started was December 3rd, 2022. Do you know where you were?
December the 3rd, 2022. No, not exactly.
I wonder, were you in the sanctuary at First Methodist Houston West Campus voting to let 294.
Oh yeah. Okay, well that's
Yeah. Okay, you were.
That's where I was.
That's where you were.
Yeah,
And then after we voted, which was fast, right? Like that we took this vote. It's decades of fighting and kind of months of this really hard strife in our family system, and we take this vote. And what do you remember? What happened afterward?
Well, I think we prayed.
We did.
That I remember specifically. It was a good prayer, too,
And
as a matter of fact.
and half the room got up and left.
No, I don't remember that.
You don't remember that? Half the room got up and left. And it was this moment that something broke, at least in me. And I really think that something broke in our annual conference. But what was true in that moment was so if the church is the post-resurrection body of Christ, and if the post-resurrection body of Christ cannot help but be alive, then a sense of defeatedness and malaise and lack of vision and direction was never going to suffice for the partners that God needed in the world. And so we had to do something because the Spirit was not done with the people called Methodists. And so I think that's where it began. And then this kind of the current iteration of it is not something I would have expected. Kenda Creasy-Dean talks about how when the church as it is kind of breaking apart, which I think is true, that it's changing. And she uses this image of flotsam and jetsam. Jetsam is the cargo that's tossed overboard, and flotsam is the broken pieces. And she says that it's possible that the flotsam of a broken church may also be the lumber that God is using to rebuild, to reimagine, and to repurpose our boat. And so I think that moment was a flotsam and jetsam moment, that the church was being busted up, and at the same time we're clinging to the pieces of the church that are going to help us rebuild and reimagine into something new.
I love the term reimagining because I think that is just, in my opinion, a very healthy thing to think about. And I think God calls us, we can get stuck in a rut.
Oh, sure.
And I think God is looking at us and saying, listen, I poured out all this creativity into you guys. I need you to reimagine what it means to be a Christian. What is the 21st century representation of a Christian community? What does that look like? We want to have, not just be a church in a community, but a church for a community. Yeah. And I think, at least, listen, the little window that I'm looking out of, but I see that happening in some places.
Yes. And it's not, I would say it's church in a community, for a community, with a community. That it matters that they're there and that they know their neighbors.
Mm-hmm. So again, I'll ask this again, what's next?
I think that next, that next is the continued movement of the Spirit. And so what do we do with this next? Where does it go next? I don't have a sense that I know, because I trust that this is work that is shared. Mm-hmm. And that it won't be under my direction necessarily, but it'll be that the doors are opening for individuals at the right time, for churches at the right time, for the conference at the right time. I do believe that we could lead the denomination in reimagining what makes a vital congregation, right. That the metrics that we've been using haven't been working. And so we could be the people who lead the way. We've led the way before, and so maybe it's time for us to lead the way again.
So when we do charge conference reports and the bishop asks, how's your joy? Bishop, my joy is up 10%. My clarity is at 65%.
Yeah, well, that's a little bit harder to quantify. But I do think that there is a kind of thinking about joy that when we started this, joy is the last one that we name. Mm-hmm. And I heard the bishop say that joy was a byproduct, and I want to quibble with that just a little bit. Okay. To say that I actually think joy is the center, that joy is the thing that we need first before we can get to clarity, witness, or abundance, or kinship. That we need a sense of hope, and that we need a positive spirit, and that we need an openness to the movement of the Spirit.
Right. So, again, you're saying they don't have to be achieved in that order.
Oh, no. No. It's not. I don't think it's linear.
Okay.
And I don't think you do it once and you're done. I think it is this, I think that they are markers. They are things to be used along the way.
Now, you mentioned a couple of churches. You mentioned Trinity. I think you mentioned a couple of other. Are there any other churches that you just would want to cite and say they've got beyond a sermon series, beyond some sort of Bible study? What are we seeing?
We are seeing I could name our first cohort of the Parish Project, and I know that we'll do that in the other episode. Right. But we are seeing that work and how that's influencing those 8 congregations. And I think that there's a lot happening in the annual conference that I don't know about. Trinity East, I called Nathan by the recommendation of someone else, and when I called him, I was floored at how he was using it. And so I'm looking forward to this podcast because I can't wait to hear other stories of how this is impacting congregations in the annual conference.
By the way, how did you get involved in this?
You know, I say I don't know the answer to that question, and that's partially true and partially not true, because I don't know how I've stayed involved with this. But I do know that in January or February of 2023, I got a text message from a friend with a link to the Lilly Endowment page that said, "What do you think?" That's all it said. "What do you think?" And I said, I think we ought to apply. And that's how I got involved.
Well, she was thinking that you ought to apply.
And that particular friend said, "I'll help you," and then for other circumstances had to step back. And I kept thinking, like, does that mean I get to step back?
Right.
And that's not what the Spirit had me do.
Yeah. Well, that's why we need to make sure that our expectations line up with the Lord's expectations. So listen, I don't have anything else to ask. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so.
So you're going to come back.
I am.
And we'll talk about the parish project. So that's it for episode 2. Thank you so much, Brandi Horton.
Yeah, good to be with you, Irv.
Yeah, same here. We'll see you next time. And listen, check us out. This is How We Thrive Podcast. Just go to txcumc.org/podcast or check us out anywhere you can find a podcast. We'll see you next time.